Yeah? So we are online. Okay. Okay.
We apologize for the online people for the delay. We just faced like a little technical issue.
Nothing major?
Yeah.
Yeah? Great. Okay. Great. Okay. Close the. Hi everyone. I haven't introduced myself. I am Rafael. We have been chit-chatting for those who are online because of some small technical issues. I'm coming from Argentina. That is the other side of the world. I used to live here in Dubai from 2008 to 2012, and since then I've been coming back and forth. The last 15 years, what I've been doing is playing around startups and MVPs, as a consequence of the first. I have some startups working in Latin America, some others in Europe, another one in the US. So those startups are working, but along with them, I have a lot of screw-ups, as I like to call them. Startups that were supposed to live, along the way. But for different reasons, either because it was not the time for the market to receive a solution like the ones we were proposing, or because the team didn't work, properly together. Sometimes time to market, or other advantages that we were supposed, hypotheses that actually we put in place, from the beginning that actually didn't happen. And it's better sometimes, regardless you have walked 100 kilometers, if you realize at the kilometer 1999 that you are not in the correct way, sometimes it's better to withdraw, your bet and bet on the next one. In a lump sum, all those startups and those screw-ups left me with some experience, a set of skills that I had to develop, slap after slap. And in the last 7 years, we have been working with 2 colleagues of mine that are specialized in product design and technology, founding a company that's called May2, the one that you can see on the screen. So during the last 7 years, we had that result. That is, the turnover of all that experience. We have been working with startups only, mainly, developing MVPs. That's what we do. So that's the reason why I'm talking about MVPs. Okay, not just because I was reading a couple of books and come here to tell you something about it. I have a lot of fun stories. When they happened, they were quite sad, annoying, but nowadays they are nice stories and actually very useful for a lot of startups. So we help them avoiding those kind of mistakes. So, okay, we're going to talk about the startup mindset. Okay, and as we go through the presentation, you will find, some difference if you have experience developing with traditional approaches or traditional companies like software factories. You will come up with some question marks, on the go. Please, anyone, whoever is online as well, if they have any question, I prefer for them to interrupt. I don't know what you prefer. Just not to make it unidirectional conversation, so anyone can just drop a question. Okay, great. Okay, perfect. So, the startup mindset. Okay, the first. Okay, great. Business objectives versus requirements. Okay. Normally, when you go to a software factory or you want to start a development project, you start wondering, all the things that you want to develop, and you start imagining all the screens, you start making drawings, you start making documentation, and you convert that a set of requirements from which you can imagine that after that, a development team will be able to deploy them. What usually happens is you come up with a great planning documentation, right? That will be the consequence of a regular development sprint. But when you're developing an MVP, you have to count, with the first important item, that you have limited resources. Normally, an MVP is going to be launched at the beginning of a startup, and they need to be very focused on what they have to do. So, instead of focusing on requirements as a fix of things that you would like your product to do, you fix on objectives, what you want to achieve once you have launched this MVP. The second one is beliefs versus creative constraints, or what is one thing and what's the other. Sometimes, actually, when you start, a development sprint while working on an MVP, what usually happens is that you have all those requirements that you have built before, but at the end, what happens, if you're not focusing on the objective of your MVP, what you want to achieve with that MVP, what happens is you convert whatever you thought about building within your MVP, a creative constraint, a creative limitation. Because when you start working with a team, a lot of ideas can come up. So if you have a fixed idea about a specific requirement, you might be losing certain opportunities. The third one is random information versus objective data. What usually happens when someone launches an MVP, they start like making random calls or sending emails, doing some interviews to the users. But you know how is it? People, when somebody calls you, on the phone, or somebody sends you an email, you either, if you are in a good mood, you just reply to the email or answer the phone call, but the information is going to be depending on a lot of things, like the context, the moment, the timing, the mood that the person is, I don't know, a lot of things. But when you try to get objective data about your MVP, you're actually having what you have to get out of an MVP, which is learning. That's the most important thing. An MVP, we'll come to the concept, an MVP is not a cheap product. It's actually a smart learning tool. You're launching something to learn from a hypothesis that, according to you and your beliefs, a solution that will fix a problem. But the MVP, you know what it stands for. Most of the people that is here and the people that is online, you know what is the acronym for an MVP is minimum viable product. You are checking viability of a solution within a certain market, right? So the second question, or the fourth question, sorry, is an MVP something that I have to scale, or will I be able to scale it, or is it something that I have to discard in the future? Well, there's not a yes or no answer, okay? There is another concept that I don't know if you're familiar with. There is the MSP. There is the minimum scalable product, which I don't like, to put at the same level of an MVP because it's confusing. But it's a valid question. Either you're going to build an MVP that's going to be discarded, or you're building an MVP that will be able to scale. Okay. And then two items to have at a takeaway is launch fast, fail fast, learn fast. Okay, and that is linked with the last one. That is, I know that perfection exists. I know that I will never be perfect, and I'm talking about my product. But I want to be as close as possible. So counting on that and focusing on launching fast, failing fast, and learning fast, well, you can know that you have to find an equilibrium between a balance between your possibilities, your functionalities, and your wishes, for the first MVP that you launch. Okay, so now we'll introduce some concepts about an MVP, okay? With depth, business value, time to market, quality, and hypothesis. When I talk quality, I'm talking about quality in terms of user experience, because as we're going to see, an MVP is not a piece of poor software. It's not a piece of failing software. Okay? So how we combine all those items? Well, when you start building an MVP, if you're focused on the objectives that you want to achieve, you have to be very smart how you combine those aspects, because a product will grow in two dimensions: the width and the depth. The width will give you the number or the set of functionalities that you want your product to have. Of course, you want as many functionalities as possible, but that's not always the wiser decision, right? Once you have defined, or as long, you define along with the definition of the width of your product, you have the depth. That is the quality. I mean, how much you're going to spend in each one of those functionalities. How you're going to make them grow. Because for sure, I mean, it would be amazing if we can create a product that users will love from the day one. But that's not your focus. I mean, what you're doing now is you're building a product to check if your solution is going to solve a problem. What usually happens, founders, product owners, or whoever carries the vision of the product, who makes the decisions, they fall in love with the solution and they forget about the problem. And that's the key. I mean, that's where most of startups and work groups, whatever, I mean, don't put in a name, whoever is working on a product fails at.
Those, by the way.
You're one of those. I've been.
Like, thanks God, I managed to move on, and I know the right thing. But I lost $15,000 in filling into the love with the solution.
Yes.
This is really weird.
Well, I know much sadder stories than yours.
Yeah.
With
It's a very sad story, like.
much more money, and you know what? Actually, there is something else. It's not only about the money that you lose.
Yeah.
There is something that money cannot buy. There is time.
Exactly.
I mean, the sooner you launch, the sooner you learn. So, and apart from that, I mean, believe me, I mean, there are a lot of great ideas roaming around the world. I can bet if we throw each one of us an idea right now onto a table, that idea already exists. So it's not about the idea itself. It's not about how genius that idea is. For sure, from time to time, a genius idea, comes up. But it's about how you implement that idea, how you take that idea into a reality. Okay? So I was talking about width and depth. I talk about a couple of other variables. That is user experience, quality, actually, in terms of user experience. Business value, okay, that is actually, and time to market that we were talking about before, when you launch. So if you play around with these three variables, quality in terms of user experience, business value that each feature will provide to the user, okay, and time to market. If you play around with those, you will have everything you need to make smart decisions about the width and the depth of your product. But always thinking about that, and without forgetting your objective. You know how you can just imagine if you would have to convert the vision of a product into something tangible. Imagine that you are in the middle of the field, in the middle of the countryside, totally black. There is no moon, there's nothing, but there's only a small house with a light switched on. Okay? You're here. You have a vision. That vision is that light. You cannot see nothing but the next step you can give. Okay? So that's how you have to build your product, based on the information that you have. Based on that, I mean, playing around with the quality in terms of user experience, the business value that you think your features will provide, and the time to market, because it's not the same launching today than launching tomorrow, you always, without missing that side you have from that light, well, you can be in a safer place. Okay? And the last one, a very important word, which is hypothesis. We don't have to forget that we are launching this from a hypothesis. The moment that we fall in love with our idea, between brackets, our solution, we're lost. Okay? When we forget about the problem that we are attending and why we are building an MVP and what the MVP is for, we are lost. So, hypothesis, hypothesis, hypothesis. We have to repeat ourselves that we are building this based on hypothesis. Okay? So far so good? Okay, now, this could be an MVP. I mean, well, when we were born, donuts were already there, but somebody had the idea before. So maybe, somebody playing with dough, at his place or his kitchen or whatever, I don't know, came up, oh, this dough, if I mix it with this and I put some sugar, I have these small balls, you know what, I'm going to launch my MVP. Okay, I will launch these balls of dough that they taste like a donut, but they are not. Actually, I'm not sure how this is going to look like, because I can see the light in the house, but I cannot see the next step. But I know that this might satisfy certain taste in the market. Okay, so you launch your MVP, which is the minimum viable product. You see that actually there is certain viability. I mean, people accept your small balls of dough, sweet sugar and stuff. So you start thinking about, okay, how can I do something that people will be ready to pay for? Okay, how can I add value based on what I have learned before that people is actually going to pay for? So this is when we come up with another concept, which is MMP, which is minimum marketable product. It means that we have already started creating a product with specific features. Okay, we didn't remove the word minimum, okay, because we are growing and we are giving another step that actually people is going to be ready to pay for. So we are making something that can be marketized, something that people is going to pay for. Okay? And then we have the MLP, which is the minimum lovable product. And this is what usually happens with product owners and founders. They start thinking about the MLP. They want to build a product that the users will love. Who told you that actually users need to love the product from the day one? For sure, while you sleep in your dreams, yes, they are all happy with your product, they love it. But that actually doesn't happen. Users will love first a product that's going to solve a problem. And then you can start thinking about building features that are going to become your product, more lovable every time. And it's not just because you are a crazy founder full of passion, that wants just to and have a lot of crazy ideas with a team, playing around with the cards, that whatever. No. It's not about that. It's about building cool features, yes, of course, that's going to be creating a product that your users will love, apart from the fact that they are going to pay for. Whatever the business model is, let's not get into that. But those cool features that are going to build the lovable product, they either have to be because they're going to allow you to generate more revenue, they're going to help you saving costs, or they will help you building a stronger loyalty between you and your users. Okay? And there is another concept, that is the MMF, that is the minimum marketable feature, when you can just isolate the idea of building an MMP or an MLP. Okay? It's just a small feature. And this actually, don't think only about the market. Think about, for example, the fact that you are launching a product in, I don't know, let's say Saudi. Okay? You're launching a product in Saudi, but the payment system that you have previously thought your product is not compatible there. But your investors are from Saudi. So for sure they will want you to have a product that can be launched in their country as well. So maybe you can consider developing a minimum marketable feature. Okay? Marketable, viable feature. I mean, it's a feature, but something isolated with a specific objective. So, what an MVP is not. It's not a navigable prototype. Okay? It's not something that you create, with Adobe XD or other platforms around there. That's a prototype, which is great. And actually, the prototype, just to standardize, the concept, is something that will allow you to take something as abstract as an idea into something tangible, something that you can show. Okay, that's a prototype. It's not a poorly or failing piece of software. Okay, having an MVP doesn't mean that you can present a product and you will give your users a product that's going to fail, because part of the sense your users will take is the way that you have built this product. A software full of coming next screens, I hate them. Sometimes it's a good idea, it's a great tool. Sometimes, to say, okay, you are getting into, we were not expecting you at this point, playing around with our application, but you have reached this point, coming next. First of all, it's discouraging. I mean, you're entering into a feature because you are expecting something. So you have to be very careful how you play around with these coming next screens. Okay, it's better to play around with all the aspects that I mentioned before, the width, the depth, the business value, quality experience, play around with all of them and create something that the user can take and use instead of putting a coming next screen, just to take into consideration. A cheap product, as I mentioned at the beginning, is not a cheap product. Let's not compare, prices. Let's not do that. But this actually triggers the second part of the sentence. That is a tool to learn. That's the MVP. Okay? An MVP doesn't necessarily need to be the first version of your product. Okay? It can be a basic version of your product. I think I mentioned it before, the concept of MSP, that is minimum scalable product. Okay? We are not going to get into that, but there are no yes or no answers for the question is, should my MVP scale, or should my MVP, instead of an MVP, should be a prototype? Okay, we have already standardized, the concepts of a prototype and an MVP, so we have cleared that idea. But let's stick with the idea that you don't need to build the first version, because actually that takes you to a place that is too ambitious. I mean, you're thinking about the first version. Come back to the initial concept, a tool to learn, okay, and check viability, the fit between product and market. So, a keynote. An MVP is an early version of your product that will give your users the sense. Okay? That's actually was the second line, but I start from the second one. I don't know why. But it will give you the sense. That's important. Okay? I mean, don't do something too basic, because you will not be able to show what you will lose the opportunity to show your users how you want to solve this problem. Okay? And the other one is an early version of the product doing a minimum effort. I know that minimum is a relative term. Okay? Minimum according to who. But meaning that you have to be smart the way that you use your funds, or your team, or your effort, your time at the end. Everything is time that you can be using for something else. Okay? That's the trade-off here. Then, how you jump from a viable product to a marketable product. Think about if you have any question. I don't know if somebody online. So, how you jump from a viable to a marketable product? Well, learning and changing and reacting fast. Bear in mind that one of the advantages that a startup has compared to big and well-established companies is the fact that they can react quickly. They can learn fast and they can act fast. Okay? So with all those learning cycles that you have, like building, measuring, learning, and we are going to get into measuring. Building, measuring, learning. Yes?
Always struggled a little bit with the difference between what a marketable product is and a viable product is.
Okay.
And if you can't market it, how can it be viable? So what are you learning at the first bit that doesn't involve someone paying for it or testing that hypothesis?
Okay, here David is asking.
Like based on how many people it can accommodate, like the server size, for example, that would be viability testing.
I will rephrase David's question. Basically, to explain again the difference between the MVP and the MMP. Yeah, right? Okay, so an MVP, let's start from the beginning. It's a minimum viable product. The MMP is a minimum marketable product. The first one is a tool to learn. It's something that you will use, and the next slide will help you understand something. It's a tool that you will use to learn if the solution that you brought up from a hypothesis is going to fix a specific problem. Okay? The MMP, once you have learned that this MVP is viable, this product is viable, okay, let's not be redundant, this product is viable, you start investing time and money to build those features that your users tell you that they appreciate.
Okay, so
No, actually, no. The only thing that you are checking as viable is the solution compared to the problem.
Yeah.
If there is a market fit between the product and the market. Okay. The next slide will help you just enlighten a bit more about this concept. So, in those iterations, there is not a specific number of iterations. You have to build as many MVPs as you consider, and then you jump to an MMP, building those features, okay, that will help you doing that. If we have time, I'll tell you one story about one startup, that will help you understanding exactly how we jump from an MVP to an MMP. Now, how you jump from a marketable product to a lovable product, okay? First, you have learned and you know what your users are ready to pay for, okay? So you start building those cool features that, remember, are to either generate more revenue, save cost, or build a stronger loyalty between you and your users, okay? That gives you a lovable product. Again, and I will recap. Most of product owners start at the reverse. Because they think and they are in love with their solution, they start building a lovable product, which is great. I mean, if you see it, it's great, but you are not 100% sure what's solving. This is the slide that I was talking about. A prototype, do not ship. Even though I have a story that a prototype that shipped, actually. But rule of thumb, a prototype, do not ship. An MVP might ship. Okay, and I have more than one example of MVPs that when they were launched to the market, they start getting traction. They start generating revenue.
When you say ship, do you mean like invest in marketing, or do you just mean like a soft launch?
No, when I say ship, I mean you can launch a product, but when you ship it, it's like, okay, it can go along, in the next step. It's like
Beta testing and
that you actually can't achieve the objectives that you proposed, and more than that. Okay, so with the same MVP, or maybe an improved version, but with the same idea of an MVP, with the same line of thinking, you were able to jump 2 stones in the middle of the night. Okay, so an MVP could ship. Okay, an MMP should ship. Why? Because it means that you have already learned what your users appreciate from your solution. Okay, so an MVP should ship. It means that if you have learned properly with accurate data, okay, you have the information to create those features that users will appreciate.
what would be like a use case for an MVP not suitable for shipping?
Come again, please.
What would be like a use case where an MVP is not suitable for shipping?
Well, first of all, yeah. Okay, the question here is when an MVP.
It's an example of like when an MVP might not be suitable for shipping.
Okay, when an MVP might not be able to ship, right? Okay, perfect. I mean, it depends on the case. It depends on the case. Here we are talking about, this is not engineering. This is closer to philosophy than engineering. Okay, that's why it's so important to come up with at least aligned terminologies. When I say ship, it means that actually is getting traction. I mean, you're not only testing, from the market if there is a fit. You have also start generating, I'm going to say revenue because it's the obvious business case. Yes. Repeat it.
Paying customers.
Okay. You have paying customers. Okay. Because your business model is based on revenue. Okay. If your business model is based on something else, let's not discuss it now, but let's assume that the business model is based on revenue. Okay, you will be getting revenue from your MVP.
There are lots of situations where the MVP could do good to test your market, but if you're in a risky industry like insurance or civil engineering, we don't really want to ship it until we really know it's going to work.
Yes.
The regulation of the industry.
Regulation in the industry, banking, finance, this sort of thing. You don't want to be experimenting in production in that environment, but you can build something to show to specific customers.
But
Yeah,
I have something to add. You will never be able to like
imagine everything you will face in the market, but launching a product will give you a lot of insights about things that you didn't think of, because as
Yep.
you mentioned, we're launching from hypothesis.
Yep.
So you need really to go to market to understand, like, there's always something that you would miss, you will never be perfect. So this is really a dumb thing.
Yeah, actually, for the people that's online, what David was mentioning here is that you don't want to launch an MVP for I don't know, for aviation, for example. Or imagine that you are building an MVP using drones. Well, you cannot build a drone, that's able to go up, but it's not able to go down. It's like, okay, you lost it. Or I don't know, launching a credit card that the
Sorry, at the time we did say that an MVP is like kind of like a finished. It's not like a shitty product. It's like kind of polished in some ways, right? So
Yep.
it's a little bit of a. But yeah, I mean, I get the overall picture.
Okay, great. So, again, a prototype will not ship. An MVP could ship. An MMP should ship. And once you have, gone through all these stages, you can start dreaming about an MLP. Now, how an MVP project should look like, just for you to have an idea. Okay, it depends. There is a previous, stage for analysis and all that, blah blah blah. But this is how it should look like. Okay, in our experience, in most of the cases, you have 2 weeks for planning. The famous Sprint Zero, if you are using, Scrum as a framework or whatever. You have 5 development sprints, okay, and then you have a sprint for closure, because actually going live, taking into consideration a lot of things like permissions, final tweaking on documentation and stuff like that. It's always, left for the last part. It depends how the company works. And also for something that we call it DGTM, that is data gathering tools and mechanisms, which is crucial. I mentioned a couple of times the word measuring, just as passing by. But it's crucial, and I wanted to reach this point. You remember one of the slides, we saw something like subjective information versus objective data. Nowadays, you have a lot of tools and mechanisms to get telemetrics from your products. I mean, you can know a lot of things. The expression of your user when he or she sees, a specific functionality in the product. How many times they enter into a screen, how many times they open and close the application, how many times they do this or that. If they get connected, to a third party that you have implemented, I don't know, thousands of scenarios. You can know a lot of things. Apart from, from the basic ones like Google Analytics and other stuff about performance, this and that, things about how your users use your application. I mean, if you take into consideration psychology, and you have something that can think, from that perspective, you'll have a lot of information, a lot of objective data, to convert that objective data into information to report back and to make decisions. When I say reporting back, I'm talking about your investors or your team or whoever you adapt your work to. Okay? My advice or suggestion is ask yourself if you really need to launch with more than one platform. Okay? When I say platform, I'm talking about web and mobile, because nowadays, again, between brackets, a small note on the foot, you can develop most of the products using hybrid technology. Okay, so you don't need to go with native iOS, native Android, except in the case that you have like a very specific utilization of resources from the device. Most of the things you can develop with hybrid technology. So I'm not talking about mobile or web. I'm mobile for both brands, major brands. I'm talking about web or mobile. So just ask yourself if you really need to go, with both of them, because they are expensive. If you are, getting yourself into this kind of endeavors, just think it twice, because it's weird the case that I found that the viability cannot be checked without one platform. Or maybe you can do a combination. For example, we have been working with one customer that some of the functionalities were in web, but most of them were in mobile, because they had like 2 different segments that they have to check. So and here is what you should take into consideration, okay? How intellectual property is handled from day one. Regardless if you are working with your own team or you are hiring a company, how the intellectual property is going to be handled, because that's your first asset, okay? How documentation will be taken care for future handovers. That's also important. I mean, you're giving one specific step, which is going to start, it's going to end. So after that, you don't know how you're going to continue. Maybe with the same company, maybe with the same developers, maybe with the same team, I don't know. So just take that into consideration. How documentation is going to be taken care of. I know that we are, everything is agile, which is great, but agile doesn't mean that you don't document anything, okay? Agile means that you think in a lean way, that you start growing from an organic point of view. I mean, it has nothing to do with no documentation, okay? And documentation is not only at code level. Of course, part of the documentation needs to be at code level, but some other, you need to be, like, for example, explanation of how the architecture looks like, okay? And there are a lot of tools to document in an agile way, okay? What's the definition of done, okay? When you are going to hire someone or build a team or assemble, a group of people to work on your product, try to get, a common understanding of what's the definition of done, okay? It's important. I mean, if you are going to be building products and you, and I tell you, yes, we are going to publish a product, okay, but publishing meaning what? That I'm going to be able to download them from the application. Any user will be able to download it. Are you going to give me the code and I will have to deploy it myself? I mean, what is done? Okay? And how future deployments will be executed. Okay? Deployment automation nowadays is for sure, you guys, you know what I'm talking about. Automating the deployment process, continuous integration and that stuff. Well, that's quite important to take into consideration. I'm not saying that you have to invest a lot on that, but take it into consideration, because after you finalize working with this specific, at this specific stage of your product, you will be maybe alone, okay? And other developers will come, or yourself, or whoever. So you need to have a clear idea how deployments are done in the future, because you have a lot of dependencies. Servers, infrastructure, databases, permission, third parties, certificates, etc., and so on. Okay, so that's also something important to bear in mind. So a couple of takeaways to summarize. Launch fast, but launching fast doesn't mean that you have to be like a wild horse. Organized, following a standardized process. Okay, thinking about these concepts: MVP, MMP, MLP. What's a cool feature? Why I shouldn't, get stick to a solution instead of looking at the problem. Do not focus on requirements. Focus on business objectives. Okay. Work on what's really needed to launch the MVP. Okay. You have to be a fan of checking the objectives. Checking what are you aiming at. Checking what you really want to build. What you really want to check from a market perspective. Okay. From a market perspective, checking the fit between product and market. Stay focused. That's it. Keep investment on development efforts under control. Okay? That's a consequence of following some of these recommendations. They are not advices. I don't give advice to someone who didn't ask it for. It's a recommendation. Don't be afraid of carrying bad news. You will have followed a process, a conscious process. You have managed, I've been following this set of ideas, something conscious, organized. You have taken care of not spending money on things that actually you don't need. So, and on top of that, and most important, you have collected data. You have actual data. You don't have like pieces of random information that you collected from a phone call or from an email. No. You have data that you have actually in a database that you can share with your shareholders, with your investors. So what I mean with this fourth item, don't be afraid of carrying bad news. Okay, it's better, from my perspective, it's better to turn red once than blushing thousands. Okay, so you will have information. Don't be afraid to go to your investors saying, you know what, all those assumptions, all those hypotheses that we put on the table before, well, no, they were not like that. They were, it was something different. We missed a couple of aspects, but let's reinvent ourselves. Let's come back, to the previous slide. Let's do another round of this MVP with everything that we have learned. But again, it's not information, just random information. It's data. So don't be afraid of carrying bad news, because it's an opportunity. And actually, not carrying the bad news is also missing an opportunity, because you cannot know what's going to be behind the answer of an investor. It might be more than positive. Ensure accurate data for future decisions, what I said. And be proud of what you leave behind. Okay? This is something that one of my partners always say. Be proud of what you leave behind. From my perspective, this applies to a lot of things, to business, to the decisions that you make in terms of developing product, because sometimes the secret for growing is not in how many times you say yes, it's actually how many times you say no. And leaving something behind in a product is really difficult. Saying yes to everything and having a list of wishful thinking, thoughts, that with everything, with an amazing backlog, with everything that you're going to build in your first MVP or your MVP, regardless, the number of iterations that you're going through, it's really difficult. And if you are always following the easy path, for sure you're not in the correct way. I mean, if you're always saying yes to everything and everyone working with you tells you yes, well, for sure, most probably you will have a challenge. So be proud of what you leave behind. This is us, okay? This is the rest of my team. We are, as I told you, we are an agency of snipers. We enter, we develop the MVP, and we leave, okay? There are certain things that we can do with startups that have grown, and had gained certain traction, but we are a sniper group, okay? We build the MVP and we leave, but following all those concepts and helping you as a product owner not to deviate a lot, and from the problem and from the problem and focusing only on the solution. Franco, Rafael, myself, and Agustin, okay, who are some of them, well, it depends the moment of the year. Right now, one of them is in Barcelona, the other one is in Argentina, I'm here in Dubai. We're like random around the world. Nowadays, it's difficult to have an office. So that's all. Again, I hope you have a couple of takeaways. I know that there were a lot of concepts. I try to make them as practical as possible. I don't know if you have any question or if there's anyone.
Advise the people online, like if they have any question, they can post it in the chat.
Sure.
If they have any technical issue, just refresh the page, because sometimes.
Okay, perfect. For the people who is online, if you have any question, just shoot.
And here, guys, if you have any questions.
Or you guys, the same. Yes.
I do have a question. So basically right now, I'm building sort of an aggregator, like without getting too much into it because it's kind of a long talk. So I'm working with my CTO right now, who's going to be building out the MVP, and I'm going to be working on like getting the merchants and just the product right. So while I'm doing like merchant acquisition, like is there anything I can do to work with my CTO? Like, so basically the prototype's something already made. So all he has to do right now is develop them, but what kind of framework should we set up between the two of us where like everything is kind of aligned on a daily basis and just how do we make that like seamless? Is there anything I can provide to the CTO that makes his life easier?
Okay, look, I mean, most of projects fail because of communication, not because of technology or timeline or quality or scope. It's more, sorry, I will just rephrase your question, is how we can work better together between yourself as a CEO and your CTO, right? I mean, there are a lot of frameworks, there are a lot of practices, a lot of methodologies. Well, nowadays you have a lot of coaches, that can help on those aspects. But my reply to you was, and it's not that I'm talking like a crazy, it's just for the people online. My reply to you was, that most of projects fail because of communication. Okay, so actually the issue that you are fixing on is quite interesting. First of all, I would say try to unify basic concepts. Like maybe you're talking about a prototype. For some, no, just giving an example. Maybe you're talking about a prototype, and your CTO is talking about a prototype as well, but for him the prototype is what actually is for someone else an MVP. So first of all, try to unify concepts. Okay. Second, standardize the way that you work. Okay. Fix on daily meetings. Work a lot with sketches. Try to transport yourself as a CEO. Try to bring, what's going on in the market. Sometimes what happens is you are on top of the merchants. You want to get merchants for your aggregator, or you want to get clients for your aggregator, or whatever. And the only moment or the only things that you talk about with your CTO is about the requirements that you need in a piece of software. Okay? Try to bring him to your reality without losing focus. Okay? Those are the two things that at least can help you, I think. Abdul.
We were going to the timeline, right? 5 sprints, 5 development sprints, then 2 weeks of planning,
Yeah.
everything. Right? So for us, we are working individually. Like he's doing the program. Do we still have to follow that similar structure, or do we have to follow any structure at all?
Well, no, you have to follow any structure you feel comfortable with. The structure that I showed, it was an example of what happened with most of the MVPs. Actually, the way that we work with our customers is we depart from there. It's 1 sprint for planning, 5 sprint for development, and 1 sprint for closure and DGTM. That is data gathering tools and mechanisms. And we try, because money it's a variable. So we try to get them to think within that period of time, within that available effort, to build your MVP. But my advice, and again based on our experience and statistics, try to define a number of periods that you want to go through. Okay, try not. This is something very common when the resources seem to be endless. You work in that way, but just because you are working on your project doesn't mean that resources are endless. So try to sort out, that's my suggestion, is try to sort out a number of sprints. By this moment, we want to have achieved this at an MVP level. Okay, why? Well, because those were the objectives that we set for this MVP. Don't forget about setting the objective first. Because if not, it's like, okay, yeah, you're working and you have the sensation that you are making progress, but the only thing that you have been doing is checking your mailbox. That's not progress, that's keeping busy. You know what I mean? Try to, take the example, but that's what I can tell you.
I like that because that's 5 times you test that you've actually finished something rather than getting to the end of 10 weeks and going, everything's 80%.
Yeah, and the 80% is always there. It's like, because you have more things to do, because it's you and you guys, you two guys.
It's just the 2 of you, it's cool. Like, don't worry with all the stadium and the management system and everything. But
Yeah.
it's really important to finish stuff in week 2, not try and finish everything in week 10.
Yep.
Just a project timeline, milestones, deadlines,
Yeah.
something just to organize work.
Yeah.
With any project.
That's it.
But when you finish it at stage 2, especially in the thing where you've got the tech co-founder and a CEO, you should then be able to test what you finished in week 2 in the market and outside of the tech environment. That's what I mean by finished. It can ship.
Yeah, get things done. Make sure that you have a clear objective, put a timeline, and try to get things done. Regardless the methodology or framework that you follow, just consider yourself as limited resources.
Not considered we are limited resources.
You should.
Every day is time. Whatever.
Okay, I don't know if we have any question there. Okay, everything was very clear or very unclear. I don't know.
We need the guys you to understand, but it was clear and clear.
It should be next
Yeah, yeah. Great.
It's a prime market over here.
Okay, great, perfect. So whoever is online, if you guys want to just get my contact details, any question, comment, idea, whatever, just drop me a message. And well, thank you.
Thank you.
Other than your agency, are you working on any startups of your own?
Come again?
Other than your agency, are you working on any startups of your own?
As an advisor, as an analyst.
I mean, like your own startup.
Yes. Two in Argentina. They are at different stages, actually.